Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins, two evangelical authors, wrote a book about the end of the world called Left Behind, which was published in 1995. The apocalypse, and more especially the suffering of humanity after the rapture, the moment when hundreds of millions of Christians abruptly vanish, was the subject of the novel. The book started a multimedia empire that spawned 4 films, including one starring Nick Cage, and 15 additional novels. The Left Behind series is a result of its historical and cultural setting, just like any other literary work. In this instance, the narrative of the Left Behind series is framed by dispensationalism, a specific form of evangelical end-times theology. John Nelson Darby was a preacher who popularized dispensationalism in the 19th century. In order to protect Christians from a 7-year period of affliction before to Jesus Christ's victorious second coming, Darby emphasized the concept of a pre-tribulation rapture. Due in part to the Scofield Reference Bible, a well-known study Bible that promoted this theology, this concept gained enormous traction among American evangelicals during the 20th century. The Antichrist, a demonic supervillain, is a central figure in this type of end-times prediction. For those of you who haven't read the books, there is a spoiler. Nicolae Carpathia, a Romanian politician, is the Antichrist in the Left Behind novels. He wants to use the UN's authority to bring about a return to global order. He declares himself the supreme potentate and assumes total control after being appointed UN Secretary General. Furthermore, Carpathia's role as an authoritarian ruler is consistent with how many Christians have envisioned the Antichrist throughout history, even though this character is a creation of the author's imaginations. Accusing politicians or religious leaders you dislike of being the Antichrist is a common polemical tactic throughout Christian history. Today, the Antichrist is often understood to be a single, frequently political figure who will oppose or attempt to replace Jesus just before the second coming. However, where did this notion of the Antichrist originate? What was the original context of the Antichrist in Christian scripture if the Left Behind book's intellectual and historical background is Protestant dispensationalist theology from the 19th and 20th centuries? Antichristos is the Greek word from which Antichrist is derived. This can be divided into 2 words, Christos, which means anointed one or Messiah, and anti, which can imply opposing, over against, or in place of. According to the Antichrist's etymology, there are 2 different but connected ways to envision the Antichrist, either as someone who opposes Christ or as someone who takes his place. In the New Testament, the term Antichrist is used only a few times, and it does not correspond with the contemporary idea of a demonic supervillain. Only 5 times, and only in 2 linked books, the epistles of 1 John and 2 John, is the phrase Antichrist used. Let's begin with 1 John, which contains 4 of the 5 references to the Antichrist. 1 John, a letter written by an unidentified individual claiming to speak for those who have personally seen Jesus, frequently uses language from the Gospel of John. The author is particularly interested in creating in-groups and out-groups in order to draw distinctions between those who follow Jesus and his teachings and those who do not. Together, the first 2 references to an Antichrist serve as proof that the end of the world is imminent. According to the author, children, it is the last hour. Since you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, many of them have already arrived. We can infer from this that it is the final hour. To put it mildly, this usage of the single term Antichrist is perplexing. By translating the word simply as Antichrist with a lowercase a, rather than the Antichrist with the definite article and capital A, the NRSV attempts to represent the author's decision to exclude the definite article from the original Greek. Scholars are skeptical because, first of all, the author seems to have in mind a category or type of person that he refers to as Antichrist, rather than a mythic character. It is likely that the author had in mind some form of end-of-the-world figure. He states right away that there are many antichrists, using the plural, which makes this particularly clear. According to the author of 1 John, the large number of people opposed to Jesus is a portent. Because, well, there are a lot of them, antichrists, who are just regular people, are dangerous. The second thing I want to emphasize is that 1 John makes it clear exactly what kind of individual falls into this antichrist group. According to 1 John 2:22, the person who denies that Jesus is the Christ is the one who is lying. The person who denies the existence of the Father and the Son is the Antichrist. Therefore, the author calls anybody who rejects Jesus as Christ an Antichrist. Later in the same book, 1 John links the Antichrist spirit to false prophets in the world and exhorts readers to carefully consider who they are prepared to listen to and learn from. The author of 1 John, however, appears to have particular individuals in mind, those who were once a part of his community but departed, and Antichrist is not just a broad category. They went out from us, but they did not belong to us, for if they had belonged to us, they would have remained with us. A specific polemic written by an early Christian leader against a group of other early Christians who left his community and who, according to the writer, dispute that Jesus is the Messiah, constitutes the initial historical background of an Antichrist. Antichrist appears to be a category of person as well, according to the author of 2 John. Many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. Any such person is the deceiver and the Antichrist. When the singular noun, the Antichrist, is employed here, it refers to anyone who rejects that Jesus ever existed. Although it's likely that the authors of these two novels were aware of a tradition involving an apocalyptic villain and were comparing such individuals to that legendary character. This interpretation is not clear-cut, and the authors don't go into further detail to support their claims. Despite the ambiguity of these texts, it is reasonable to assume that Antichrist in 1 and 2 John primarily serves as a synonym for the words heretic or apostate. This leads academics like Robert C. Fuller to draw the conclusion that we should therefore be wary of the conventional belief that the Johannine Antichrist is merely one variation of the long-standing popular expectation of an extremely malevolent foe like is found in Revelation. Rather than a supernatural beast, the Johannine Antichrist alludes to heretical humans. Into the 2nd century, the name Antichrist was still used in this general sense. To support his own case against those who would contest the truth of Jesus' execution, resurrection, or impending judgment, Polycarp, a bishop of Smyrna in Asia Minor, invoked 1 John's assertion that an Antichrist was anybody who rejected that Jesus came in the flesh. Such individuals were generally referred to by Polycarp as children of the devil and Antichrists. Therefore, the idea of the Antichrist remained a powerful yet general tool to define borders between insiders and outsiders, many decades after the author of 1 John first started to circulate among Christian groups. This is where the concept of the lone supervillain enters the picture. Christians began to understand the idea of antichrists and use it in novel ways during the 2nd and 3rd centuries. In order to create and develop a character who would challenge Jesus when he returned, Christians began to interpret the phrase in light of previous Christian writings. In particular, they began interpreting the idea of an Antichrist in the book of Revelation and the 2nd letter to the Thessalonians, 2 New Testament texts. The Antichrist character was significantly expanded in France in the latter part of the 2nd century to resemble contemporary representations. The bishop Irenaeus imagines a character who will come to fight Christ at the end of the world by fusing the Antichrist from 1 John with other biblical passages. Irenaeus presents the concept of the Antichrist as a false ruler who is endowed with the devil's power and who comes at the last minute to deceive the masses in the 5th book of his work against heresies. The phrase Antichrist from 1 John is combined by Irenaeus with a verse from 2 Thessalonians concerning an enigmatic character known as the man of lawlessness. The verse continues, "Now concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. We ask you, brothers, let no one deceive you in any way, for that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first, and the lawless one is revealed, the son of destruction." According to 2 Thessalonians, this man of lawlessness is the son of destruction or perdition who would pose as God while sitting in God's temple. According to the text, the man of lawlessness is already at work in the world and will keep doing so until Jesus comes back to destroy him. He is also linked to demonic miracles and marvels. Even while not all historians accept that the Apostle Paul penned 2 Thessalonians, Christian philosophers continued to speculate about the author's identity, which makes it even more difficult to solve. The first to directly link the Antichrist to the lawless man from 2 Thessalonians is Irenaeus. Irenaeus also links a specific prophecy from the book of Daniel in the Old Testament to the Antichrist in Against Heresies. Irenaeus also included the book of Daniel's prophecy on the Son of Man with these biblical readings. One of the four creatures that the author of Daniel sees there has 9 conventional horns and 1 little horn. Irenaeus contends that this little horn is the Antichrist from 1 John and the son of perdition from 2 Thessalonians, even though the book of Daniel most likely alludes to the 10 kings of the Seleucid Empire, which is pertinent to its own historical setting during the Hellenistic era. Based on these 3 texts, he imagines that the Antichrist will rule the world for 3.5 years before being destroyed by Jesus. Lastly, Irenaeus uses the book of Revelation to construct the Antichrist character in one more significant way. Additionally, Irenaeus had a wealth of information at his disposal if you are familiar with the book of Revelation. He contends that the number 666, known as the mark of the beast, is a reference to the Antichrist made by John of Patmos, the author of Revelation. John utilizes this figure to allude to Jesus and his followers, past and future adversaries, the Roman ruler Nero. You can represent a single word with a single number by combining the value of the word's letters together. If you've watched my video on 666, you'll know that ancient humans assigned numbers to specific letters. Since my name Andrew is Andreas in Greek, for instance, you could symbolize my name with the number 361 by combining the values of those letters together. John used the name Nero Caesar for this, which adds up to 66666. However, Irenaeus contends that 6666's referent is even less clear-cut. Irenaeus suggests a few names that might be associated with that figure. He suggests names like Latinus and Titan, but dismisses them, saying that God would not have hidden the name in a numerological puzzle if he wanted Christians to know who the impending Antichrist was. Throughout the 2nd and 3rd centuries, other Christians continued to develop the Antichrist figure, occasionally taking Irenaeus's lead and other times departing from it. Tertullian, a writer from North Africa, contended that the Antichrist would be a person who would deny the resurrection of the flesh at the Last Judgment and would appear close to the end of the Roman Empire. What obstacle is there but the Roman state, the falling away of which, when scattered into 10 kingdoms, will introduce Antichrist upon its own ruins? Tertullian not only combined the Antichrist from 1 John with the man of lawlessness from 2 Thessalonians, as Irenaeus did, but he also compared this figure to the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns from Revelation. He continues by asserting that although the prophets foretold the fall of the Roman Empire, God's wrath, and the resurrection of the flesh, the destruction of the Antichrist must come before the resurrection can actually take place. The first comprehensive dissertation on the topic, On Christ and Antichrist, was written by another church leader by the name of Hippolytus. Hippolytus, who was most likely writing from Rome, makes the following claims and queries regarding the Antichrist. What will his arrival entail? What is his name? From where? How are we going to stop him? Christ and the Antichrist are portrayed by Hippolytus as being completely parallel. Both will resemble a lion and a lamb. Both will be heavenly beings in human form. Both will be circumcised, and both will be able to attract others to them. Hippolytus is the first Christian author to attribute a specific birth narrative to the Antichrist, quoting from the book of Deuteronomy. While Jesus is from the tribe of Judah, he positions the Antichrist in the Israelite tribe of Dan, and as the head of the people of Edom, the Israelites' old adversary. The Antichrist's Jewish identity here leads to a lengthy history of anti-Semitic accusations that link Judaism with the Antichrist, despite the fact that both Christ and the Antichrist are portrayed as Jewish characters. Thus, the transition from a general category to a particular supervillain occurred early in the history of Christianity. Several books, particularly 2 Thessalonians, Daniel, and Revelation, are used to construct an Antichrist figure by the end of the Roman Empire. The Antichrist continues to evolve as we enter the medieval era, becoming as the primary foe that God's chosen people, or even angels, will have to contend with at the end of time. The Tiburtine Sibyl, an old book that was extensively revised and enlarged by Christians in the Middle Ages, is arguably one of the most important accounts of the Antichrist during that time. I prefer to think of it as the Left Behind series in the Middle Ages. The story is crazy. The daughter of the Trojan king, the Sibyl, is brought to Rome in the Tiburtine Sibyl to present a vision to the Roman Senate. She predicts the reign of a character known as the Last Emperor in this vision. In the context of medieval Christian thought regarding their role in preserving and enhancing the Roman Empire, this emperor emerges as a key figure. According to the Sibyl, Constans will be the last emperor, destroying all pagan temples and converting the populace to Christianity before the Antichrist confronts him. The Sibyl's Antichrist, who is the son of perdition alluded to in 2 Thessalonians, is a Jewish guy from the tribe of Dan, based on early Christian conjecture. In the Tiburtine Sibyl, the Antichrist is paired with Gog and Magog, two nations loyal to Satan that are referenced in the book of Revelation, but are now recast as northern barbarians that Alexander the Great imprisoned till the end of time. Before Christ returns, the last emperor gathers his army, vanquishes Gog and Magog, and then travels to Jerusalem to abdicate his throne. Additionally, the devil and the Antichrist begin to be confused in some medieval stories. For instance, the medieval dialogue between Jesus and the devil explores the possible dialogues between Jesus and the devil during their one encounter on earth, filling in the blanks in the story of Jesus' temptation in the desert. In this exchange, the devil asserts that, when he takes on human form, he is the Antichrist. According to this passage, Jesus imprisons the devil in a pit and says that one day he will reappear as a pickled fish in a meat market, where he will be bought, consumed, and born from a woman named Perdition. Because the Antichrist is actually born from a lady named Perdition, the early Christian assertion that he is the same person as the son of Perdition in 2 Thessalonians is interpreted literally in this instance. Thus, this fish-based medieval tale demonstrates how the Antichrist figure changes significantly throughout Christian history. When the term Antichrist was first used, it was a general term from a polemical literature that was used to describe a group of Christians who had abandoned a specific Christian community as antichrists. However, we observe a pattern in the evolution of the Antichrist figure beginning in the 2nd century and continuing throughout the medieval era. First, Christian authors frequently added fresh biblical verses to their prophecies about the identity of the Antichrist. In order to investigate the life and destiny of a person who was only mentioned in passing in 2 brief epistles, they constructed intricate webs of scriptural interpretation. Second, over the years, Christian authors have continued to compile biographical information about the Antichrist, including his ethnicity, possible names, actions, abilities, and even a backstory that includes fighting the last Roman emperor in order to get ready for the end of the world. Some Christians were interested in learning as much as they could about the demonic person who will imitate Christ and mislead countless others. An endeavor that many Christians still take seriously today. Early medieval Christian writings provided Christians with comprehensive and perhaps contradicting knowledge concerning this last adversary.